Our movie begins with Rose Miller riding her motorbike to work as she nearly got into an accident, and as a result, she was late for work. And Rose is a struggling fashion designer who works for Gunter, this Gunter. And this Gunter is an egotistical designer. And when she arrives at the office late, Gunther, who was already giving a speech on their new launch called Schadenfreude, decides to chastise her for being late. And he always dismisses her work, saying that they are functional but forgettable. And Rose wanted to cry, but her coworker Brad asks her out on this date to go to this big fashion party that's happening later that evening. And Rose works with model and her best friend Chelsea, who is her adopted sister at the same time, and she invited her to go with her to the party. But Rose told her about her date with Brad, and it's kind of obvious that Rose has a crush on him. And later that night, at the party, the guard lets Rose in after making sure her name is on the list, despite letting two attractive ladies in without a second glance. And inside, Rose meets up with Brad, and the two flirt and talk about why Rose is wasting her time working with somebody like Gunther, but she admits her love for fashion and how clothes make her feel more comfortable with herself. And Brad was impressed and he tried to kiss her, but she pulls away, looking surprised. And then he apologizes and goes to get them a drink while she uses the nearby restroom to freshen up. And Rose overhears the models from earlier trash talking about her scars from the incident that killed her family. And this incident led to her adoption in Chelsea's family, and they also point that Chelsea was the one who asked Brad to take Rose on a date. Rose becomes enraged and confronts Chelsea, and she explains how she just wanted her to be happy because she knew how much she liked Brad and how he felt the same way. But Rose is upset by the idea that she's someone's charity case. She lashes out at her for invading her life and rushes out of the club as Chelsea follows behind her. Trying to get away from Chelsea, Rose was on her motorcycle and she gets hit by a passing truck. And after a week later, Rose wakes up from a coma and the doctor informs Rose that her jaw was mangled in the accident and that her motorbike ripped out some parts of her intestines. And Rose got curious and wanted to see herself in the mirror, and her jaw was displaced in the crash and had to be wired shut. One whole side of her face is a gaping wound from her ear to her mouth, and the doctor explains multiple constructive surgeries are actually required, as well as months of recovery for her to actually start to be normal. And after all the surgery and all the work, Rose is out of the hospital and she moves in with her friend Chelsea, and she even makes room in her fridge for Rose's vegetables because Rose is a vegetarian. And Rose thanks her using her chalkboard because she can't speak. And before she goes to work, Chelsea informs her that Brad was concerned and left her an email. And when Rose sees herself in the mirror, she breaks down and struggles to drink a smoothie through her mouth opening. And as she browses through her emails, she ignores Brad's emails asking if she's okay, as she spots an email from her local research and medical facility, a place called the Burroughs Clinic. They sent her a video explaining their recent new experiments, and it's a private clinic that promises cosmetic miracles with no fees other than being an example of their success. She went to the hospital with Chelsea and they meet with William Burroughs, the owner and leading physician, who explains that they opened this hospital with his now dead wife Cynthia, and he also tells Rose that he will use stem cell therapy to treat her. And although Rose was scared, she agrees. And the surgery happens and it was a success. Brad comes to visit Rose and he meets with Dr. Burroughs, who asks him to discuss things about Rose. And Rose looks even better than she did before her disfigurement, and she no longer requires glasses, so it appears that the surgery also improved her vision. And she gets pretty hungry for a moment and she hears a man whistling from down the hall and she follows the sound. And Dominic, a well-known actor, was swimming in a clinic pool where he notices Rose near the pool's entrance. And she walks around him as he compliments her appearance, and the two of them become even closer and begin to make out aggressively. And before Dominic pulls back, realizing Rose has bitten his tongue, Rose realizes what she did and she flees. The next day, Rose informs Dr. Burroughs of the incident but leaves out Dominic and the biting, and she's concerned that something is wrong, but he calms her down and assures her that she's just dreaming. He tells her to rest if she ever feels tired, or else the medication she takes will make her have vivid hallucinations. To help complete her transformation, he gave her a bunch of protein shakes and informed her to take them if she ever has trouble consuming regular foods. Chelsea is then seen in the waiting room when Rose appears. At first, she doesn't recognize her, but once she does, she is stunned by Rose's beauty, and the two embrace each other and leave. Back at home, Rose wants to return to work when Chelsea suggests that she should do what she likes and do some new paintings and designs and show Gunther. As she was working on her new designs, she hears a knock at the door and answers to find Brad. And he was stunned by her beauty, and he apologizes for what happened with Chelsea. But Rose was still bitter about it, so she turned him down and closed the door. And later that night, Rose and Chelsea go to a nightclub, and this time the bouncer immediately lets them in, shocked by Rose's beauty. And this intrigues her as well because people don't really react to her that way. And as they were about to go in, they meet with Gunther leaving, and he compliments her beauty and the dress she's wearing, which she informs him she designed herself. And he tells her he'll be happy to have her back at work, which she gladly accepts. Back at the club, Rose and Chelsea drink and have fun. They dance with some men as Rose leads him and the two start making out, and suddenly Rose ripped off his shirt and scratched his abdomen and she bites his neck. But then she wakes up and it turns out that it was all just a dream and she drinks from her protein shake. Meanwhile, Dominic is seen in a filming studio getting ready to shoot, and he is irritated with a fever and he appears hyper than usual. During the shoot, he grabs the female co-star aggressively as the director calms him down and everything seems normal until they bring a new actor, and Dominic becomes furious and tackles him down to the ground and bites chunks of skin from his face. Back at home, Rose feels immense pain in her stomach, and as she tries to take medication, she collapses and passes out from the pain. And she wakes up and takes the protein shake, and she felt hunger and went to the fridge to get some food, but instead of eating food, she felt a sudden urge to swallow the raw meat and drink blood, and she did. And she suddenly snaps out of it and she realizes what she just did. And at night, we see a man being thrown out of the club by the security guard because he was cursing at them. Then he tries to flirt with this girl but gets rejected and he walks off. And the man starts cursing and insulting her, and we see Rose following him from behind. And she asks him for a ride and he tells her to get in. And inside the car, Rose took his hand and bites him and turns him on, and he starts aggressively kissing her as she begins tearing into his neck. And all of a sudden, she wakes up thinking it was a dream again until she sees the blood on her mouth and hand. And the next scene takes us to a hospital where a nurse goes to check on a patient, and it turns out that this patient was the actor that Dominic bit. And she tries to comfort him when he suddenly lunges at her, showing his mangled face. And the nurse screams in horror trying to get away from him. He attacks the nurse, bites off her finger, tackles her to the ground, and slams her head on the floor before two male nurses appear to restrain him. But he also manages to bite and infect them too. And the hostile then smashes a glass window with his head and shatters it. And meanwhile, Rose goes back to the hospital to tell her doctor about her nightmares. And he tells her that they might feel real, but they're all just inside her head. And Rose returns to work, and Gunther was very impressed by her paintings, and he tells her that they're ready to design for their upcoming Schadenfreude. And Rose was happy and thanks him as they got to work. At the hospital, Dr. Riley from the CDC meets with Dr. Beverly to talk about the recent incidents with the hostile. He questions the new disease because it appears to be like a rabies virus, but Dr. Beverly claims that the symptoms appear to be far worse and more aggressive. She takes him to Dominic, who was the first victim and is being restrained to a bed while shaking hysterically. When they get closer, they see that his eyes have been bloodshot and he's foaming profusely at the mouth. And he lunges at them, but he's stopped by his restraints because he just wants to bite them. And back at work, Brad asks out Rose on a date again, and they go to this small restaurant where Rose expresses her concerns about the recent nightmares that she's been having. And Brad expresses his love for her and he tries to reveal a secret, but she feels a sharp pain in her mouth and excuses herself to the bathroom where she discovers a tapeworm-like creature under her mouth. She returns to the table and is about to leave as Brad asks if she's okay and if she needs a ride when an infected man breaks through the glass window and tackles both of them to the ground. Brad throws the man away from Rose as he bites another man, and Brad beats the infected man to death with a nearby fire extinguisher, and when he turns around, Rose wasn't there. Dr. Riley and Dr. Beverly examine the infected, who is kept in a small chamber to prevent him from harming anyone else. They observe that the infected person is no longer themselves. The disease affects their nervous system, making them insane and dangerous to themselves and others. They talk about how making a vaccine as soon as possible is necessary, or else this disease is going to cause a huge pandemic around the world, like, that year that we never talk about. Yeah, like that year. The next scene shows us Rose screaming after she discovers that the creature in her mouth has grown. She goes to an alley and a man tries to help, but the creature in her mouth grabs and devours him. The next morning, Rose notices the protein shake that she's been drinking actually looks like blood, and she skips her medication as she goes to work, and Brad tries to talk to her about what happened the night before, and she excuses herself, mentioning the medication she's taking is messing with her head and that she doesn't remember how she got home, and Brad tells her that he's the one that took her home. The night of the show for Schadenfreude arrives, and Rose was looking for Chelsea, who was late. And soon after, Rose is called by Dr. Burrows, who informs her that he requires her to stay at the clinic for an extended period after reviewing her results. And he also asks her if she can come tonight, but she explains that she cannot until tomorrow. And he accepts this, and he has this weird blank expression on his face. And Chelsea finally shows up, upset and crying, telling her friend Kira that she was attacked and bit by a crazy woman on a train. And Rose doesn't know of Chelsea's arrival as she went outside to call her, and she felt an immense pain in her stomach again, and she falls to the ground. Two men were laughing at her and recorded a video when the creature from her mouth stabbed and killed the black guy, and Brad knocked out the other one for laughing. And Brad brings her inside after he manages the creature, and we can see the two men outside rising quickly. And as Rose wakes up, Brad insists to take her to the hospital, but she refuses, saying she wants to see Chelsea first. And the show soon begins, but Chelsea appears paler, and Rose and Chelsea confront each other before Chelsea tells her that she's fine, and Rose takes the front seat next to Gunther. And a model falls off the stage and seems to gag as Brad appears next to Rose and tells her that he knows everything, when suddenly the model screams as Chelsea attacks her, and Chelsea then attacks Gunther and infects him. And people flee as the black guy from earlier, who is now severely infected, is shot down, followed by Chelsea. And witnessing this, Rose screams like crazy. And in the next scene, we see Brad and Rose arrive at the clinic with Dr. Burrows, and she informs him that the nightmares were real and that she was the source of the outbreak. And he refuses and tells her that there may be an unknown disease that's killing people and that there may be a cure. And he tells her that it's already with them and that it's actually named death. And then he leads Brad and her to a red room and he locks them in. And Burrows looks eerie as he tells Brad that it may be time to finally tell Rose what's been going on. And Brad tries to stop him, but he reveals that he hired Brad to keep an eye on Rose outside the clinic, demonstrating that he knew about and purposefully created what Rose had become with the surgery. And Rose appears betrayed and she confronts Brad, but he claims that he never intended for her to get hurt. And suddenly, Burrows releases a hatch from the roof, covering Brad in blood, as he edges on Rose to conquer her hunger for blood by killing Brad and not ignoring the predator within. And Brad is suddenly grabbed by the creature that was against the wall, and the creature is apparently Cynthia, Burrows' late wife. It's revealed here that she was the first patient of his experimental surgery and that she donated her body after death for a greater cause. And Rose's tapeworm attacks and stabs Brad in the neck as she takes a nearby knife and cuts it off and kills it. Brad ends up dying, obviously, and Rose stabs Dr. Burrows' wife to death, and she continues to slit her throat, not wanting to be used by Burrows ever again, and she passes out and she dies. And then we see the news reporting that the city is free from the virus as they had to kill the infected to avoid it from spreading. And back at the clinic, Dr. Burrows is seen examining his plans for what will happen next as he prepares a blood smoothie and tray full of cooked raw human meat, while several tapeworm-like creatures are imprisoned nearby. And he puts the tray in the red room as Rose wakes up. And that is how our movie comes to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed our recap. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment. I'll see you guys on my next recap. Bye.